Thank you. Helps to bring the energy back after lunch, right, doesn't it? Now, this was Nine Inch Nails, and a couple of years ago, Nine Inch Nails brought out an album. It was called Ghosts 1 to 4, and the album made 1.6 million revenues in the first week it was out. Now, honestly, I don't know whether that's a lot or not. Sounds like quite a lot. The interesting thing is that Nine Inch Nails did not work with a record label. Actually, they had a contract before, but they cancelled it before they brought out the album. Now, you're probably thinking, okay, they must have sold the music on iTunes. Well, they did not. And the most interesting thing is actually that it was available as a free download. Now, think about it. Here is an organization that gives away its core product for free and still makes 1.6 million in the first week in the process. Now, I don't know about you, but I think that's a pretty cool achievement, isn't it? And we know lots of organizations that have reinvented or redesigned the way they do business. And if I say we know lots of them, you probably, first of all, think about the Googles, the Amazons, Spotify, Airbnb, and so on and so forth. But there are also a couple of established incumbent companies who have achieved to redesign the way they do business. And I was always more interested in those than in the startups. We know quite a lot about how the startups do it, but we don't know so much about how these incumbent established companies achieved it. So I asked myself, well, how do established companies actually create new business models? And I was pretty serious about getting an answer, so I went to Manchester Business School and I did a PhD on answering that question. So quite a devotion. And one of the things that is covered, or many insights that is covered there, they moved into what is now a book. So we developed the ideas further that came out of the research. We developed a couple of concepts, and they are available as a book now. I've got a copy with me if you want to have a look afterwards. And one of the stories that I have in the book, and that was also part of the research, is a German TV company called Pro7 Sat.1. It's the leader in the German TV market. It's one of the leading TV media companies in Europe. And in 2012, they set themselves the goal to grow by 1 billion until 2018. Now, 1 billion, it sounds like a lot, but if you actually look at it, 42% over 5-6 year period, it's not more than actually 10% year-on-year growth. So it's not that fantastic, I would say, or not that a stretch. The interesting thing, though, is that how do you achieve the plus 1 billion in growth? Now, the German TV market is pretty consolidated. You have two big players. Pro7 has about 12 different channels catering to different customer groups. So adding more channels is not really a solution. And the German TV market, by law, regulates how many minutes of advertising on average throughout the day you can broadcast during an hour. So there is a legal limit on how much of your product you can actually sell. So how do you grow in such an environment? Well, they devised a strategy called Innovation, Growth, and New Markets. And new markets actually didn't mean we expand geographically, but it meant we really go into completely new areas for us. So new ventures. And the strategy was actually so successful that at the end of 2015, they had already almost a plus 1 billion in revenues. And because it was working so well, they said, well, we'll increase it. We have to increase our goal, and now the target is 1.85 until the end of 2018. Now the question is obviously, how did they do it? What did they do, right? Well, they designed new ventures, and this is what I'm going to talk about, show you what they did and what the key steps and principles were. So designing a new venture, what does that mean? Well, I believe it means that you need to answer these three questions. Where do you want to play? How do you want to play? And how do you want to win with that new venture? Now, there is a traditional way of answering these questions, coming out of traditional strategy, traditional marketing, and so on and so forth. And then obviously, as we're here talking about design thinking, there is a more design-oriented approach, which fits quite well with what Pro7 and companies that have achieved similar things do. Now, let's start with where to play. So where to play, well, talking about the art of opportunity, where to play is all about finding an opportunity where you could grow by $1 billion or plus. Traditionally, where to play is a matter of you pick an industry, and we have tools like Porter's 5 Forces, which tells you whether it's a good industry to be in or not. And then within the industry, it's about the product market mix. So you need to find a good fit between the market and the product. Now, and this doesn't come as a surprise to you guys, I guess, when we're talking about design thinking, it's more looking at the customer, so you don't think too much about the industry. Pro7 is in the TV media industry. They said, this is where we are, this is where we're good at, so we're not going to go into other industries. But within the industry, look at the customers, the needs, and the customer experience. Now, when I say customers, usually when I talk to business executives about this, they immediately think about existing customers and the best customers they have. But obviously, that's not where your growth lies, right? Your best customers are already your best customers, and you might want to talk about their needs and their expectations to make sure you keep them, but growth of $1 billion is not going to come from your existing customers. So you look at what we call non-customers. And we split them up in 4 different categories. So we talk about unsatisfied, we talk about people who are doing business with you, but they are not happy and they are ready to switch. If there was a better alternative, they would be gone. We talk about the refusers. So they know your product or service or offering, but for some reason they don't find it very interesting. We talk about wannabes. That's an interesting one because they would like to have your product, but something's keeping them from buying. So there are some, maybe it's too expensive, they cannot afford it, maybe they don't have access, maybe they don't have the skills to use it. And there are the unexplored ones. Now the unexplored ones are usually customer groups that your company or your industry also has never thought of serving. So again, this is more on the, let's say on the company side, you don't think that they are maybe profitable. Or with the existing business model, you cannot serve them in a very profitable way. Let's look at Pro7. So they said, well, typically our customers are the big Coke, Nestle, Procter & Gamble, Unilever. These are the typical customers of TV media. But startups and small and medium-sized companies are not customers of TV media. So that's the non-customer opportunity they identified. And we're going to come to why these customers are usually not buying TV media. Now, and once you have the customer group or the non-customer group, it might be worth investigating really why they do or don't do business with you. Most companies, they think they have a good idea of why the customer comes to them, but that's not the case. One of the companies we worked with is here's London. It's a Swiss private clinic, and the managing director said from the beginning, well, we don't have a clue why the patients come to us. Obviously they are sick, but there are dozens of other hospitals in Switzerland they could choose. Why do they come to us? So they set out to investigate the question. They did interviews, they did market studies, they did analyses of secondary research, and they discovered 2 insights which they used to completely design a new business model. The first insight was, well, it's not the patient who decides which hospital to go to. It's usually a family doctor who refers them, or if they go to some kind of specialist, or the brain surgeon or the heart surgeon, he or she says, I'm working, or I would like to work at Here's London, so I'm going to operate you there. That's the first insight. The second insight was, well, once the patient is at the hospital, the medical treatment is actually not that important for satisfaction. Obviously, it needs to go well, the operation needs to go well, so there's a minimum level, but beyond that, It's much more the non-medical services, as they came to call them, that are important for the satisfaction of the customer and whether the customer comes back to that particular hospital. These two insights led to the development of a completely new business model. So on the one hand, they said, we're going to see these private practitioners as our customers, so not only the patient, but also these doctors, and we're going to offer them a wealth of infrastructure and services. The services even include, they employ certain generalist doctors like radiology, anesthesia, internal medicine, who then provide services to the specialists. The specialists, they had some brain surgeons, heart surgeons on the payroll. They said, no, we encourage you to leave. You should all become independent. We're going to help you to organize yourselves. We're going to give you infrastructure. We help you with strategy. We help you with marketing of your private practices. But you should be doing your business on your own, and we want you to work at Here's London. So that was the partner side, so to say. And on the patient side, what they did is they introduced hospitality services. So they hired a former managing director of a 5-star hotel. They hire staff that is trained in providing services in hospitals, and they completely reorganized internally around these areas. So they have one pillar, which is what they call the medical system. So this is all with the doctors and everything, nursing and so on. They have one pillar, which is the non-medical services. So that's everything but the services, facility management, and then they have a management level, which is everything around finance and administration. So they went from a quite broad org chart with, I think, 11 different departments and a management team with 11. They shrank it down to these 3 to really focus on the core that they had identified as their business. Quite successful. We have international clinics like Mayo. They travel to Zurich to learn how these guys work. Now, obviously, once you do this, you understand what the customer wants, and you're probably all familiar with the famous marketing quote that the customer doesn't want the drill, but the customer wants a hole in the wall. You could take that even further. The customer doesn't really want the hole in the wall, but it's rather about hanging the picture, or even a step further, it's not so much about the picture, but it's more about the emotional need of remembering a good time you had with your family. By the way, I was always one not to hang pictures in my apartments because I didn't want to have these holes in the wall which I needed to repair when leaving. So I can really relate quite good to that. And actually, thinking like that also led a company like Tesa to develop these self-adhesive stickers, kind of thing that you put on the wall and then you can hang your picture without the need to drill a hole. Now, obviously, so I don't need to go into the details here, right? You guys are all familiar with this. Once you have the need, you can look at the customer experience. And if you're looking for new growth, the interesting thing is to look at what are the barriers that keep customers from buying in this experience cycle, and what are the hurdles to satisfaction once they have bought. This is where the opportunity for growth then lie. Pro7, so they went out, they talked to startups and to small, medium companies, and they discovered, well, first of all, most of these small companies cannot afford TV advertising. It's just too expensive. If they can afford it, they don't want to really spend the money on something where it's not quite sure whether you're going to have a benefit. Right? If you do advertising, you can't know whether the sales are really going to go up or not. And even if they would like to spend the money, they don't have the experience, they don't have the skills, they don't have the capabilities to do TV advertising. So that was the opportunity. Here we have a customer group, and we know what the problem is, what their barriers to consumptions are. So once you know that, it's about designing the new venture. It's about defining how do you want to play now in this market, in this opportunity. How do you want to seize the opportunity? Now again, traditional ways, traditional way actually don't see it. It should be a question mark here. I think it's too light, right? Traditional strategy doesn't tell us much about this, how to play. There are different ways of what is strategy, but doesn't really give us an answer. What we see here is that designing the new venture means you design the offering, including customer experience and all these things we talked about, but you need to go beyond that. It's also about designing your business model. We're going to come to the details, and it's about designing your revenue model. Sometimes you focus more on one aspect than on the other, but at the end of the day, decisions you take in the business model space are very likely to have an impact on customer experience and on offering, and decisions you might take on the revenue model side also have an impact. Right? So just quickly designing the offering, well, you can think about your product, the services around, and the customer experience. The business model, now, if I say business model, a lot of you probably think about the canvas, right? Now, the canvas is one way of defining it, and in the literature, actually, you find two schools of thought. You find those who say, well, a business model is quite broad, so that's something like the canvas. Some of these broad definitions even include the strategy in the business model. They include culture in the business model. They include even leadership styles in the business model. And there is another school which says, well, we need to define it a little bit more narrowly, because if it's everything, then it's nothing, and we cannot really design it. So, and the narrow schools, they tend to focus on the business model as an activity system. So they ask about what are the activities that we as a company and in a larger network need to perform in order to deliver our products, our offerings, and our customer experience. Right? If you think about, we had the Amazon example with web services before. Right? Amazon, the activities that need to be performed at Amazon is also delivery, but Amazon doesn't do it. Right? So you need to think broadly about all the activities that are necessary, not only the ones that you do. You think about what are the resources, the assets, the skills, the capabilities needed to perform these activities. You think about sequencing and linking activities. Well, how do they bring together? Remember, some of you are old enough to remember Dell, the first business model that was taking out the distributors. Now, this is a good example of also a business model that changed the sequence. Because at Dell, you first ordered your product, then you paid, and only then Dell sourced the raw materials, only then they built, and then they shipped it immediately to you. Right? And because they changed that sequence, Dell actually had at the beginning a negative working capital, which means that they had more money going in than they needed to finance the business, right? Which allowed them to grow quite rapidly in the beginning. So business model innovation can also come from changing the sequence of activities. And then finally, you think about roles. So you think about who is the best internally to do an activity, or do we also need to go outside? Like I said, Amazon relies on outside partners to perform activities. So this is a more narrow definition of what a business model is. And then finally, we have the revenue model. So revenue model is all about where does the money come from, revenue streams. It's about how do you set the price, and it's about the payment method. So how does the money get paid? When does it get paid? Is it installments, upfront, afterwards, and so on and so forth. Now, an interesting company that has gone through the evolution of going from purely being product-based to offering customer experiences with new business models and new revenue models is Hilti. Hilti is a Liechtenstein-based company producing power tools for construction industry, so drills, hammers, these kind of things. And they are well known for their products, so that's where they come from, where they started. But over the last 2 decades, roughly, they have introduced more and more services. The initial services were only focusing really around the tools, like the classic stuff, warranty, repairs, maintenance, and then it went more into application consulting. If this is the task, this is the tool that we would advise you to use. And then it went more into really customer experience. So nowadays they have something which is called fleet management. So you actually don't need to buy the tools, but you can rent them from Hilti, and Hilti pretty much takes care of everything around. So they take care of logistics to make sure the tools you need are available at the construction site globally where and when you need them. They take care of repairs, they take care of maintenance, they take care of upgrading your tools. So if you don't buy the tool, you just rent it. If there's a new version, you get the new version. This is one example. They have many tools, many services around experiences for purchasing, for financing, and so on and so forth. This obviously changed then also the business model. If I now rent the tools, right, Hilti needs to take care of different activities. It's no longer the sales, but they need to take care of all the logistics, which requires different skills, different capabilities that they need to do. And obviously it also changed the revenue model, because now instead of a one-time payment, I go into a monthly fee for the rental. Another nice example I always do is Anti-Café. The French colleagues among you might have come across it. It's a cafe chain in France mainly. There's another version in Russia, and you don't pay for the coffee. The coffee is free, but you pay for the time you spend in the coffee shop. So if you sit there for an hour, it's $5. If you sit there the whole day, it's $24. Right? So very easy thing. And if you think about it, it's kind of logic, isn't it? Because if you think about a coffee house in Paris, the most expensive asset is probably the people and the rent you have to pay. The coffee is probably marginal in the total cost. So make the customers pay for what is really expensive instead of the coffee. Good. So what did Pro7 do? Well, Pro7 said, our offering, we're going to give these guys access to media. We're actually going to give it for free. And we're going to help them with media strategy and planning and everything. Business model, we needed some new activities because they said, we're not going to give this to everybody. We're going to be really specific about where it works well. And I'm going to come to how they learned what worked well. But they have different activities. So they introduced target selection is what they call it. So this is really picking the right clients they want to work with. Which also required them to get specialized expertise. So they hired investment bankers, they hired people coming from venture capital because they were good at target selection. And they created, obviously, if the media is for free, we need a new way where the money comes in. And they started off with only media for revenue share, meaning I give you the media, we do the spot, and if it generates additional revenue, we get a share of that. That was the initial version. Then it evolved, so they introduced also a fixed fee. I'm going to come a little bit more about why they did that, and they introduced finally also something they called media for equity. So they invest with the media into startups these days. So this was the offering. So this is how they planned to seize the opportunity they had. Now, if you do these kind of things, you have maybe you have lots of ideas of what is going to work and what you should be doing. Now the question is, which one do you go for? And when it comes to how to win, so traditionally it's about low-cost differentiation or you focus on a niche. We've been talking a lot about you need a good customer experience to win, and I would encourage you to go even beyond that. It's not only about the customer, it's not only about value for the customer, but a good strategy, a good business model, and a new venture also needs to deliver value to you as a company. And especially in the case if you rely on a lot of partners in your ecosystem, it also needs to provide value to your ecosystem partners, otherwise why should they be doing business with you? And if you think about value now, especially for the firm value, it's not only financial value we're talking about. So Dell is financial value, but Dell was also operational value because it had shorter life cycles, it had much more flexibility and speed in the production chain. And it can also be strategic value. Now you mentioned the Amazon Web Services before. I think that's a good example for how a business model can enable a company to go into different areas. Like Amazon could only go into the Amazon Web Services because they had a business model that required them to have certain capabilities and certain assets, all the servers and everything. A Barnes & Noble didn't have that opportunity because their business is not built on having that IT infrastructure. So this is what I mean by strategic value that a certain business model can give your company. It can allow you to venture into new areas. Pro7, the interesting thing is, so I said at the beginning, Pro7 only had the media for revenue share. And they discovered that actually with this model, all the value is with the customer. It was not profitable enough for Pro7 to go on like that. So that's when they said, we're going to introduce a fixed fee. So media for revenue is more on the customer side, and we have the fixed fee to do the initial planning and analysis and everything, so at least that's going to cover our cost here. So this is going to create more value for Pro7. On the other hand, you have, especially in the case of startups, you have other equity partners and investors. Now, they were pretty unhappy at the beginning with this model because it meant if Pro7 is successful and revenues go up, well, they also take a big share of the revenues back out, right? So you had a cash drain from the company and the other investors were not happy about that. So that's when they realized, okay, well, let's also invest and do a media for equity deal. So this way, we provide value for all the parties involved. For the customer, it's good for us. They also realized that in some cases, especially in the case of an IPO, they would have profited much more from an equity partnership than just the revenue share. And now they are equal partners with the other equity partners, with the other investors, and they also create value for them because the value of the company goes up. Now, for those of you from Germany, Zalando is an example that Pro7 made big. So they really pushed it with, it's an online shoe retailer, and they really pushed it with the media that Pro7 invested into the company before there was an IPO. Okay? Now, so this was designing the new venture, where to play, and how to win. Now, the question is also, once you have designed it, how do you bring it out in the market, right? How do you launch it? And the first thing, this is where my research really concentrated. So that's the core of my research, was the process of how these companies do it. And the first thing I learned was, when I did all these interviews, everybody said, or I would ask about, okay, do you have a plan, a project plan, something like that I could have a look at to get a little bit of an idea what it was actually that you did. And everybody said, yes, we have one, but we're not going to show it to you because that's not what happened. So this idea of planning, you can forget about it, right? When it comes to creating these kind of ventures, even more so if you have a really innovative, in the sense of new to the world idea. How would you plan that, right? Nobody has ever done it, so you have no clue what you should plan for and what the forecast could look like. Everything's just assumptions, and even making these assumptions here is difficult because, again, you don't really know what it's going to look like. Right? So what I did actually was to make sense of all the data. So I mapped all the activities that I gathered from thousands of pages of company documents, so all the meetings they did, all the workshops they did, management decisions that were made, and so on and so forth. And I mapped that out, and I tried to make sense of all the data I had. And being trained in traditional strategy, I tried to go with the typical, first there was probably an analysis, then there was a plan, there was an implementation. And that didn't work, so you couldn't make sense of the data with applying these categories or this lens. It looked a little bit like design thinking in terms of an iterative cycle of, well, you act, you learn something, and then you further design, and you take it from there. But also, only applying the design thinking lens wouldn't explain everything that was going on. So I came up with 3 phases in this process. There is what I call an inception phase, evolution phase, and then a diffusion phase. Now, inception phase, still taking pictures. The inception phase is actually the one where we are at the moment. So we have an opportunity, and we have a rough idea on how to seize that opportunity. So the rough idea for Pro7 was media for revenue share. The rough idea for Here's London was, we're going to combine the chief physician system and the private practitioner system. But at the moment, this is all there is. There are no details. There is no detailed plan. There is the managing director of Here's London said, I had this idea, but what it should look like, I had no clue actually. So this is what happens in the inception phase. And then you actually go out and you test. So what did Pro7 do? They issued a press release. So very simple, doesn't cost anything, right? And to test whether there was interest in the market. And they got dozens of business plans back. They had a look at all of them. 2 guys at the moment working on this project, 2 people only, full-time working on the project. One was a senior manager, one was somebody just hired out of university. And they sat down, they had a look at all these, and then they picked a handful. But again, there was no sophisticated model and no criteria how to pick them. It was really just, oh, this one looks interesting, let's call them. This one, no, don't like them, no, let's go away, next one. So very easy way of going forward. Now, this was the initial concept test, right? Very rough. If you want to do it in a little bit more of a structured way, I proposed 3 steps, which again, is familiar to design thinkers. First one, does it make sense internally? Can we pull this off? If it requires an investment of 100 million, which we don't have, then, well, it's not a good idea. Second one is, so this is more the internally one. Second one is you go outside and you actually ask the customers, you ask the partners, would you guys be willing to do this? Here's London had to go and explain to the chief physicians and the specialists that they would have to lay him off, which on the upside means they have a bigger share of the money, the surgeons, they keep all the money. On the downside, it meant, on the short term at least, Here's London lost that revenue. But still, they needed the doctors to be okay with this model, and they actually involved them in the co-creation process to get feedback and so on and so forth. And then the final step would be you actually go out and you test. So Pro7 picked 5, said, we're going to do it with you, right? And then you enter the evolution phase. So this is the typical iterative cycle of try something, does it work, and then build upon that. in my understanding, my mind is it's not really prototyping because we are actually really doing business already. So we have these 5 customers, it's on a small scale, but there were contracts, business has been done, money got paid, so it's really doing something very specific. So it's not just showing a prototype around, would you be interested in this? So as I said, this is the typical cycle where you go through it. Now, this doesn't go on forever. At some point, after having gone through a couple of these cycles, obviously then your new venture has reached a maturity level where you say, now it works sufficiently well, and this is the moment where the focus shifts. So you shift the focus from designing the new venture to scaling it up, which is then the third phase, which is all about diffusion and scaling up your business model. So for Pro7, this meant founding a dedicated company, hiring more people, establishing process standards, to be able to make this happen on a larger scale. And after the first 2 years, and we're still talking only about a team of 3-4 people, they made 20 million in profit. Meanwhile, so that's now 5-6 years after really starting it only, it makes 30% of revenue. So the 3.2 billion, 1 billion is from this thing. And the plan is until 2018, it should be 50% of revenue should come from this and similar ideas. What they also have done, meanwhile, they have further developed it. I skipped that before in terms of the strategic value for Pro7. They have built a portfolio of strategic investments, so in different categories. So they said, we want to be big in lifestyle, for example. So they invest into startups that have anything to do with lifestyle, from, as I said, Zalando with shoes, to clothing, to glasses, to online fitness portals, and so on and so forth. They have a second category, which is all around travel. So they invest strategically in travel startups that have to do anything with online booking, travel guides, hotel reservations, flight reservations, these kind of things. So it's a strategic investment for them, and they have further developed the model in that direction. So a friend of mine summed it up in terms of, okay, we need to think big, we want to have the billion, right? But we need to start on a very small scale, and then we build it up step by step. So this was my take on how you can use design thinking to design an enterprise to achieve a strategic objective. If you're interested in how 9 Inch Nails did it, or a lot of other companies, and also how you can do it, I encourage you to get a copy of the book. On the website, we also have a lot of templates and posters, so pretty canvas thinking thing that you can download for free. So we have the 2 best ones I like is actually an opportunity report, so it helps you to structure what is really our opportunity and describe that in a nice way and visualize that. And the second one is the strategy report, which again helps you to illustrate what is our strategy and what is the value that we should create. And whatever you do, it's not so much the new ideas that are difficult, but it's more letting the old ones go. That is a challenge for most people. And with that, thank you.